It took me a long while to realise is that God accepts me absolutely as I am. Even though I knew God loved me, I always felt there was a little bit of me that maybe wasn't quite right.
I never consciously married a man. I married Jo for who she is as a person.
I've survived in the church as a priest because I think it's an in-between space. And I guess as a queer person, that's a space that we know how to inhabit a little bit, because to be a queer person is to live between the spaces of the straight world, really. I was originally ordained in England into the Anglican Church. The first thing I learnt at school was not the 3 R's, but actually the gender binary. And that happened the first day at school, and they blew a whistle and we had to go into 2 lines. And I remember being sort of I think I got told off for not joining the right line. I mean, I was always enchanted by what my mother wore. When my family were out, I would sneak into my mother's room and, put on jewellery and things.
Today's Gospel passage is a call to share good news in positive, healthy ways.
I mean, I grew up in a tradition, you might call it sort of liberal Catholic tradition in the Anglican tradition, which emphasised really grace and love rather than sin. Well, I think the heart of what Jesus said was that you're to love God with all that you are, and that means your sexuality and your gender is what I discovered. It's not something you have to hide away or be ashamed about. Just before we came to Australia, the first 2 transgender priests came out in the Church of England, and I realised I am possible, not just as a trans person, but as a priest as well. If I'd stayed in England, I think I would have come out, 15 or more years before I did. But because I came to Australia, which is a more conservative religious space than even in England, it meant that it delayed things because we had to rebuild our lives here and establish ourselves. When I came out, I was concerned about how people would respond, and I knew that there would be people supportive, including in my own parish. I did receive some negativity from certain quarters of the Anglican Church in Australia. Penny and I met at theological college, training to be ministers, so that was over 3 decades ago now.
I suppose one of the things that first actually attracted me to Jo was her femininity, you could say. And so it wasn't a huge shock or surprise a few years into our relationship. We were literally in the bedroom together making the bed, and I came across a piece of clothing that I knew wasn't mine, but was female. And I'm like, okay, so where's this come from? And she was able to tell me straight away. So I'm like, oh, okay, all right, well, this is a new richness to who you are.
Football is something that enabled me to mix all kinds of men. But it was also about identity, because it meant that I could belong to my community. I was a sort of a founder member of the Central Coast Mariners supporters team and watched them for several years. Football's a little bit like religion. It's about commitments, it's about expression, it's about hope, it's about joy. My hope for the future for churches is that they join the rest of us in sharing our love and our joy and our diversity, which is a gift of God.